Before we begin studying Paul's epistle, the word epistle means letter. Before we begin studying Paul's letter to the Romans, I wanted to first begin by doing an overview of the whole book or the whole epistle. Basically, what I want us to understand is this epistle is seen as Paul's magnum opus. The book of Romans it's the first of all the epistles listed in the New Testament. Mainly it was set there because it's seen as the one of primacy, the one of primary importance. Very similar to how we see in the prophets, you get Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel are before all the other prophets. This is not saying it was the first chronologically. What it is saying, though, to the early church, this book had some great meaning. And again, it's from this point I want us to step back a moment and talk about this book. Now, the gentleman who I have on my shirt here, this is John Gill, this happy guy. Say hi, John. John Gill. John Gill, great expositor of the 1600s. Love the man, love reading his commentaries. John Gill once said about the epistle to the Romans, he said, the epistle to the Romans, the chief design of this epistle is to set in clear light the doctrine of justification. He then goes on later to say, the effects of which are peace and joy in the soul, and holiness in the life and conversation. Before we begin and start talking about this overview, it's this last section I want us to focus on. Yes, the first section is great. You can pick up many great commentaries that focus on the doctrine of justification, doctrine of sanctification, doctrine of election, doctrine of predestination, how to live the Christian life. We can even get some minor ones which go over the Romans road through here. But it's this last portion I want us to focus in on. Remember, the book of Romans was written to a group of house churches in Rome. And it's this last section where it says, the effects of which are peace and joy in the soul and holiness in life of conversation, which is where I want us to spend our time. What I want us to understand is this epistle was written to a church that was not at peace. They did not have the joy. And this would affect their holiness and their conversation with the Gentile world. So I want us to take a step back. And that's why I wanted to do this overview, to give us a one-sentence concise summary. If I could put all of Romans in one sentence, I would say, I believe Romans to be a treatise on the nature of the people of God. Now let's step back again for a moment. I realize many of you have read commentaries and stuff, and they will spend a lot of time on sanctification, a lot of time on justification, which is rightly deserved. But for this study, again, I want us to look at the people. And so as we're going to go through this opening, as I read and talk about this, I want you to see all the different sources that I've used. Now, this whole Bible study that we're going to go through is an amalgamation of all these different resources. But what I want us to understand, if you're jumping into this study just to learn more about election or learn more about justification or learn different aspects of sanctification or whether Paul was talking directly to corporately or individual salvation, you're not going to find that as much. Yes, we will address that. But again, the point of our study is to look at the Roman church and to address where their context was. So, as we begin, I see the Epistle of Romans be a treatise on the nature of the people of God. And as I continue, I'm going to scroll through all my sources, all the people that I've studied, all the people that I've looked at, including this guy right here, this happy guy, John Gill. And I want you to understand that, again, I've read through all these, and we're coming to this study. But now if I can give you a big picture summary. The Epistle of Romans is written to the churches of Rome. Paul wants to establish a base of operations in the capital city of Rome, the network of churches in Rome, modeled after the church of Antioch in the east, which we see in Acts, will be a strategic city in evangelizing the Western world. This is in order to create a hub for missionary endeavors. You see, it's vital that the church in Rome must understand the underlying theology of this missionary endeavor. Failure to create this mission theology Failure for the Church of Rome to be a missionary church could have very damaging results, just as if you read through Acts, seen in the church in Antioch. So in my opinion, Paul's writing this letter to prevent problems he experienced in the theologically split church in Antioch. This letter is about peace and unity among the Roman house churches, which we will look at. This letter is written to lay out a theology, yes, of sanctification, which is to be lived among the brethren. Paul is writing his introductory letter to the Christian in Rome to lay down the essential markers for the people of God. You see, in Antioch, Paul had witnessed a church which was pulled in the direction of maintaining the distinctiveness of the Jews and Gentiles within the church. As witnessed in Acts, there were actually an inner circle of Jewish Christians who leaned more into their culture than the cross of Christ. And this, as Paul's going to point out, is a tragedy. This inner circle, who in Antioch were probably some of the original founders of the church, seemed to press the Gentiles into adopting the practices of circumcision in order to be a member of their inner circle or to be a higher level Christian. This idea of works, this caused confusion among the saints in Antioch, to say the least, so much so that even Peter and Barnabas were caught in the cultural confusion, if you recall. You see, the problem that Paul foresees in Rome is the mirror image of this. In Rome, a largely Gentile church is so relishing its status as the people of God that it is in danger of writing off ethnic Jews entirely. This desire of Jewish Christians to keep dietary laws and other customs when the need for them had passed is created in the minds of the Gentile majority, which we're going to see labeled the strong, a second-class status at the most for these weak Jewish believers who leaned into their culture. You see, this weakness in the minds of the strong had led some of the strong to begin believing that those Christians who hold fast to past Jewish practices are beyond the reach of the gospel. Now, Paul is writing this letter in fear of this rift in the Church of Rome. Now, Paul wishes to argue for two things. One, total equality of the Jewish believers and Gentile believers within the church. And two, to establish a missional mindset within this church going forward, which always includes the Jews in its outreach. Remember, the Jew first and then the Gentile. In other words, Paul presents a mission theology for the church as it expands to include those from every tribe, tongue, and nation. You see, the church is non-sectarian in regards to people. The strong of the church must therefore bear with the weak and not just please themselves. Likewise, the weak must strive to live their lives with their feet firmly planted on the cornerstone, which is Christ, and embrace the lived theology of the cross and not lean into the cultural background, not lean back into the Torah, not lean back into their old fundamental ideas. You see, Romans is a letter in which Paul plants his goal of the mission and unity of the church in theological soil. And so before we begin the study, I want us to understand that. Yes, there's a lot of great, what we would call systematic theology in here. A lot of great ideas of justification, sanctification, pneumatology, Christology, just theology in general. There's a lot of this great stuff in here. But what I want us to understand, it was written to a group of people who did not have peace and did not have joy among each other for cultural reasons. And it's that reason that as we do the study, we're going to follow from the idea of McKnight, that we're actually going to start in the back of the epistle. We're going to start at the end of the epistle for our first couple studies and look at these people first. We're going to look directly at the people who Paul was writing this letter to first, get an idea of who they were, what their problems were, and get to know them in context. And then after we study the last several chapters, 12 through 16, after we study these last several chapters, we'll go back with more understanding and read the rich first chapters of the book of Romans. So I hope this gives you a little bit of background of where we're going to go and what we're going to do. And again, as our overview of the church overview of the epistle of Romans, which is, in a one-sentence summary, Romans was written to be a treatise on the nature of the people of God.